Imagine for a second that you're dropped into the middle of this dense, completely uncharted, fog-covered forest.
Sounds terrifying already.
Right. And you reach into your pocket for a compass because, you expect that comforting, objective magnetic pull to just point you toward true north.
Yeah, you want that safety net.
Exactly. But you open it up and there's no needle. There are no cardinal directions painted on the dial at all.
Just a blank face.
Just a completely blank face. And you suddenly realize this compass only works if you can perfectly synchronize it with the rhythm of your own heartbeat.
Which, if you're lost in a creepy forest, your heartbeat is probably...
It's racing. It's an absolute nightmare scenario for a hiker. But here's the crazy part. Back in the 1970s, the United States military and their intelligence agencies basically looked at that exact scenario and said, yeah, let's do that.
I mean, they didn't really have a choice.
Right. They realized that using the highly flawed, totally distractible human nervous system as an objective intelligence gathering tool was like their only viable option to spy on the Soviet Union from thousands of miles away. Welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive, by the way. Today, we are getting into some wild territory.
We really are, because, we always crave an objective map. We want a machine or a satellite or some computer program that just prints out the answer for us.
Just hand me the data.
Exactly. But when you're dealing with non-local perception, which is the ability to access information across time and space without any physical sensors, you don't get a machine. The instrument is literally your own central nervous system.
Which is messy.
Incredibly messy. Yeah. And the history of this entire field is basically a decades-long struggle to figure out how to filter the clean, non-local data from the absolute overwhelming noise of human imagination.
And we have an incredible stack of sources today that maps out that exact struggle. I mean, we're looking at a declassified 1985 CIA manual on coordinate remote viewing.
Which is dense.
Yeah.
Very dense.
Oh, super dense. It breaks down these rigorous stage-by-stage military protocols. We've also got transcripts detailing the actual biological brain science behind dowsing, plus insights from operational remote viewers on how to navigate hostile threat environments.
The active countermeasures are fascinating.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into the ghost frequency stuff. But the real crown jewel here, our main mission today, is breaking down this highly specialized custom technique known as the squirrel sniper method.
Also known as the etheric pulse and internal dowsing technique.
Yes. So the goal here is to really trace the evolution of these mechanics, right? We need to understand the structural physics of how the brain accesses this non-local data, the vulnerabilities, like how a 19 hertz frequency can literally vibrate your eyeballs, and finally, how this custom synchronization of breathing and your own cardiovascular rhythm acts as this infallible, self-correcting biological compass. Okay. Let's unpack this, because before the military was using, abstract coordinates, ancient cultures were already doing this, right?
Oh, absolutely. They approached it from a purely physical, geographical standpoint. The sources talk a lot about early geodetic maps.
Like telluric currents.
Exactly. Ancient seers and dowsers were tracking telluric currents, which are these low-frequency electric currents naturally traveling through the Earth's crust.
So they weren't just sitting in a dark room.
No, they were mapping out intersecting nodes and literally building structures like Stonehenge right on top of them.
Wow.
And if you fast forward to the mid-20th century, you've got Russian scientists proposing the worldwide grid, which is this geometric pattern of energetic lines shaping the crust. The ancient approach was super environmental.
Right. You didn't need random numbers.
No, because they believed these physical, energetic intersections acted as natural boosters for human consciousness.
Yeah.
The working theory was basically, if you physically stand on a telluric node, the ambient electromagnetic field lowers the barrier to non-local perception.
Like standing on a literal 5G signal booster.
That's a great way to look at it. You are the antenna, and the Earth is the amplifier.
But the U.S. military, they couldn't exactly rely on sending undercover spies to stand on ancient energetic nodes in the middle of Soviet Russia.
Not very stealthy.
No, not at all. So, enter the Stargate project, early 70s, Stanford Research Institute. You've got physicists Harold Perthoff and Russell Targ.
Testing psychics in labs.
Right. Strict laboratory conditions, trying to see if they can weaponize this for intelligence. And their initial approach was, it was called the outbounder, or the beacon protocol.
Yeah, and the mechanism behind the beacon protocol is deeply rooted in human biology. See, the military figured out pretty quickly that it is exceptionally difficult for the human mind to just float out into the ether and find a cold, static object.
Like a concrete bunker.
Right, or a filing cabinet. Our nervous systems just didn't evolve to care about concrete. They evolved to care about other living nervous systems.
Survival mechanism.
Exactly. So to give the remote viewer something loud and vibrant to lock onto, they would send a physical human being, an outbounder, or a beacon to the target site.
And they wouldn't just like stand there silently, right?
The protocol required active interaction. The beacon had to touch the brick walls, smell the ambient air, listen to the traffic, and emotionally engage with the space.
So they're soaking it all in.
Every sensory detail. And back in a shielded, sound-attenuated lab, the remote viewer is given one single instruction.
Which is?
Focus on where this person is standing right now. The beacon is acting as a human transducer.
Okay, wait, transducer, like in electronics.
Exactly like that. A transducer converts one form of energy into another. The human beacon takes the raw physical reality, the temperature, the texture of the brick, the smell of ozone, and processes it through their biological senses.
Oh, I see.
That data translates into neural firing patterns, chemical shifts, and emotional resonances inside their central nervous system. So the viewer back in the lab isn't actually looking at the brick wall.
They're reading the beacon's mind.
They're reading the processed biological signals radiating from the beacon. It's a relational biophysical resonance. Tracking a living human that you have a rapport with is vastly easier than tracking abstract math.
And it worked, right? The SRI trials had crazy hit rates.
Upwards of 40 to 50%, yeah. Which in the intelligence community is a massive statistical anomaly.
But I mean, relying on a human transducer has to have huge flaws. The sources talk about displacement.
Displacement is a nightmare for data reliability. Because if you're tuning into the beacon's mind, you are entirely at the mercy of whatever that beacon is paying attention to right at that second.
So if the beacon is like stuck in traffic on the way to the Soviet bunker.
And they spend 20 minutes staring in frustration at a highly unique suspension bridge out their window.
The viewer in the lab starts drawing a bridge.
Exactly. You get perfect drawings of a bridge, which is useless if the target is a secret warehouse. Or if the beacon is just bored and daydreaming about their childhood home, the viewer starts describing a suburban living room. You aren't viewing the objective coordinate anymore. You're viewing the subjective mental state of the beacon.
Okay, so that's the data problem. But the sources highlight an operational security risk that sounds way worse. Telepathic backmatching.
Yes. In counterintelligence, you always have to assume the adversary is at least as capable as you are.
Right.
So if you're using a beacon to target a Soviet facility, you have to assume that facility is protected by their own defensive remote viewers.
Psychic sentries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the sentry essentially meditates on the baseline ambient consciousness of their facility. They know what the normal background noise feels like.
So when the outbounder walks in, they cause a ripple.
A slight ripple, yes. But the real vulnerability happens the moment the remote viewer back in Maryland establishes the connection to that outbounder.
Wait, if a beacon is just a human lighthouse walking around, how does an enemy sentry trace a psychic connection all the way back to the U.S.? What is the actual mechanism there?
It's because an active two-way biophysical circuit is created. The sentry detects this incoming vector of attention, this sudden, massive spike in non-local observation.
Oh, wow.
Because it's a resonant bridge connecting two nervous systems, the sentry can lock onto that bridge and follow the signal backward. They trace the resonance right back to the physical coordinates of the viewer.
That is terrifying.
It is. And once the sentry finds the viewer, they can hijack the signal line to inject false data, or even hit the viewer with a dense, chaotic mental pulse designed to cause severe physiological fatigue.
Just fry them, as they say.
Break the session completely. So the military realized pretty quickly, okay, we have to abandon the human lighthouse.
Yeah, that's too risky.
They needed a way to navigate the non-local field using nothing but abstract numbers, leaving zero human footprint at the target. Which brings us to the CIA Manual on Coordinate Remote Viewing, or CRV.
Right, so with CRV, the viewer uses abstract coordinates like randomized 8-digit numbers to access the informational matrix passively. No outbounder, no resonant bridge to trace, just a blind jump to a number.
Exactly. But making that transition required a total rethinking of how the brain processes information. Because in CRV, the enemy isn't the Soviet psychic sentry anymore.
Who is it?
The primary adversary is the viewer's own neocortex. The military identified this fatal cognitive flaw they called analytical overlay, or AOL.
Oh, yeah, the guessing machine. The conscious brain is incredibly aggressive at predicting things.
It hates ambiguity.
So if the non-local signal feeds you a raw fragment of data, say a feeling of cold, hard metal, and moisture, your neocortex instantly tries to resolve it. It screams, Cold, wet metal, it's a submarine.
And the moment the brain makes that guess, the non-local signal line snaps.
You stop getting real data.
Right. You just start describing your own mental image of a submarine from some movie you saw last week.
So how do they stop that? Because the neocortex is fast.
It operates on serial processing and semantic logic. It takes about a quarter of a second, roughly 250 milliseconds, to process incoming sensory data compared to memories and form a concrete guess.
250 milliseconds, that's nothing.
It's a blink. So to bypass this, the CRV protocols established a highly structured, super fast-paced methodology designed to literally outrun the neocortex. You have to capture the data before that window closes, and they do this through the ideogram.
The 1985 manual is so specific about this. The ideogram is this spontaneous, reflexive mark you draw on paper within the first 1/10 of a second of hearing the coordinate.
Barely time to react.
Right. The tasker reads the numbers, you repeat them, and instantly slash a pen across the paper. So it's basically like downloading a compressed zip file of a location, and tracing the pen is how you extract the files before your conscious brain tries to guess what's inside the folder.
That is the perfect analogy. The mechanics rely entirely on autonomic reflex. The signal hits the autonomic nervous system first, translating into a micromuscular impulse in the hand. You draw a quick line, a curve, maybe a loop.
And the manual breaks this down into 3 strict components, right? Stage 1.
First is the A component, the physical motion and feeling of the mark itself. Was it a sharp, rigid upward spike? That indicates a tall structure. Was it a fluid horizontal wave? That's a body of water.
Okay, then there's the B component, the basic descriptor. You write down the most primitive classification possible, like man-made, water, land, or energetic.
Nothing more complex than that. And finally, the C component is the touch. The viewer puts their pen back on the line they just drew and feels for a split-second sensory feedback.
So a jagged line might give the C component feedback of hard, cold, metallic.
Exactly. You force the analytical mind to do extreme microclassification, so it simply doesn't have the bandwidth to guess the big picture. It's a calculated drip feed of data.
And once stage 1 is done, you move to stage 2, sensory clarity, colors, textures, smells. But the golden rule here is absolutely no nouns, right?
0 nouns. If the signal gives you the image of a steering wheel and you write down steering wheel, you fail. You have to break it down. Cold, round, hard, textured, plastic.
Because nouns trigger the AOL.
Nouns are the domain of the analytical mind. Adjectives bypass it, and the structure just builds on itself. Stage 3 introduces dimensionality, high, wide, deep. You can draw simple sketches, but only raw geometric shapes.
And stage 4 is where it gets operational. You detect intangibles, like heavy military security or clandestine activity.
Yes, and by stage 5, you're interrogating the data you already wrote down. If you wrote rhythmic metallic noise in stage 2, you isolate that phrase and prompt it to find its exact mechanical origin.
And stage 6 sounds messy but brilliant. You put down the pen and use clay to build a 3D model of the target.
It occupies the motor cortex so heavily with tactile kinesthetic feedback that the analytical mind is almost entirely silenced. But throughout all these stages, the looming threat is always AOL.
So how do you handle it when you feel that guess coming? Because it has to happen.
You quarantine it. When you feel the urge to guess lighthouse, you immediately stop. You physically write AOL lighthouse on the far right side of your paper.
You just get it out of your head.
You acknowledge it, externalize it, take a physical breath to reset, and dive back into the signal line. It is incredibly laborious.
So that's CRV, desk and paper, high speed. But the sources contrast this with extended remote viewing, or ERV. And ERV takes the exact opposite approach. Instead of outrunning the analytical mind, ERV tries to chemically and electrically put it to sleep.
ERV is wild. It requires inducing a deep hypnagogic trance. The goal is to lower your brain's electrical oscillations into the theta band, which is between 4 and 7 hertz.
You're basically asleep.
Your physical biology is asleep, yes. You lie in a dark, soundproof room, undergoing profound progressive muscle relaxation. But your consciousness is awake and tethered to the target.
But if your motor functions are offline, you can't hold a pen, you can't write down AOL.
Which necessitates a second person in the room, the monitor. The monitor is like the surface crew for a deep-sea diver. They keep you anchored, they softly feed you coordinates, and if your biometrics show you waking up into a higher frequency alpha or beta state, they use auditory driving to put you back down.
Auditory driving, like binaural beats?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The sources mention hemisync binaural beats by the Monroe Institute. If you want to force a brain into a 4 hertz theta state, you can't just play a 4 hertz sound. The human ear can't hear frequencies that low.
Right.
So binaural beats solve this by playing two different frequencies, 100 hertz in the left ear, 104 hertz in the right ear.
And the brain makes up the difference.
The superior olivary complex in the brainstem tries to integrate the conflicting signals and creates a third, phantom internal beat at exactly 4 hertz. Your entire neural network entrains to that scanning wave.
That is fascinating. And since the viewer can't write, the monitor manages the AOL dynamically. If the viewer mumbles, "I see a nuclear reactor," the monitor has to intervene.
Without saying you're wrong, right. They'll say, describe the raw physical shapes and colors, making you say nuclear reactor. They deconstruct the guess in real time. ERV produces these vivid, first-person experiences where you feel like you are physically walking the halls of the target.
Okay, so CRV and ERV are great for finding out what is at a known coordinate. But military intelligence often has the inverse problem.
You know what you're looking for, but not where it is.
Exactly. You're looking for a downed pilot or a stolen warhead, but you have no coordinates, you just have the identity of the target. And that operational gap required the intelligence agencies to look at the ancient biological science of dowsing.
Dowsing is the exact inverse of remote viewing. RV is where, but not what. Dowsing is what, but not where. And to understand how dowsing actually finds a target, we have to look at the transcripts breaking down the metabolic energy consumption of the brain.
This part blew my mind.
It completely upends how we think about intelligence. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. Keeping that network firing requires about 6 kilocalories of energy per billion neurons every single day.
It's a hard metabolic limit.
Yes. The brain has to heavily prioritize which hardware it uses. The neocortex, the part responsible for conscious thought, logic, language, only contains 16 billion neurons.
16 out of 86 billion, that's like nothing.
It's tiny. Then the limbic system, for emotions, holds about 1 billion. But the cerebellum, the primitive reptilian structure at the base of your skull responsible for safety, survival, and subconscious processing, contains a staggering 69 billion neurons.
69 billion.
It is a massive parallel supercomputer dedicated to keeping you alive, operating entirely below conscious awareness.
The transcripts also highlight the glands coordinating this, right? The pituitary gland for the endocrine system, the pineal gland, which has magnetite crystals to interact with magnetic fields, and the hippocampus for spatial navigation.
Exactly. The problem with the neocortex is it processes serially. It's slow, narrow bandwidth. When a dowser operates, they intentionally bypass that tiny 16 billion neuron logic center.
Because it just doesn't have the juice.
It doesn't have the parallel processing power to scan infinite non-local fields for its specific resonant frequency. Dowsing taps directly into that 69 billion neuron supercomputer in the cerebellum.
And the cerebellum scans the matrix, finds the target, but since it's subconscious, how does it tell the physical body?
Through the ideomotor effect.
Okay, wait. Skeptics use the ideomotor effect all the time to debunk dowsing. They say, look, there's no magic field moving the L rods or the pendulum. We can see the micro muscle twitches in your wrist. You're moving the stick yourself. But you're saying that's actually the exact mechanism of how it works. Your subconscious is moving the stick.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The skeptic thinks proving the muscle moved, the tool debunks the phenomenon. The dowser knows the tool itself is totally meaningless, and L-rod has no magic properties.
Just brass on a string.
Right. The actual dowsing instrument is the dowser's central nervous system. When you hold an intent like locating a missing person, your cerebellum acts as a parallel processor scanning for that signature. When it finds a match, it sends a signal down the descending motor pathways of the spine, triggering an unconscious muscle contraction in your hands.
Oh, wow. So the tool is just a visual amplifier.
It just amplifies those micro movements so your conscious eyes can register the subconscious hit. So when the skeptic says you move the stick, the trained dowser replies, yes, my autonomic nervous system moved the stick because my autonomic nervous system found the target.
That completely reframes the whole concept. And military viewers like Paul H. Smith use this for map dowsing. They'd take a blank piece of paper, mentally key it to represent, say, the Middle East, and slowly trace a pen over the grid.
Waiting for the cerebellum to trigger the ideomotor response.
Yeah. When their wrist twitched, they marked an X. They found the coordinate biologically and then launched into a CRV session on that X to describe what was there.
It's an elegant integration of two biological hardware systems. But there's a crucial nuance here about how the cerebellum prefers to process data. Traditional dowsers often ask questions like, is the underground water here?
But questions engage the neocortex.
Exactly. It introduces doubt and analytical processing.
Yeah.
The optimal energetic alignment requires the use of statements.
Instead of asking, you create a declarative resonance. You state, the underground water is located under my feet.
By making a statement, you fill your biological system with that reality. Your subconscious cerebellum checks that statement against the non-local field. If it matches, energy flows smoothly, and the pendulum indicates yes. If it's false, you get cognitive friction. The pendulum indicates no. You act as a tuning fork.
But if the human nervous system is this unbelievably sensitive, if it can detect grids and scan the globe through microscopic muscular tension, then it has to be super vulnerable to disruption.
Highly vulnerable.
And once intelligence agencies realized remote viewers could theoretically infiltrate any secure location on Earth, they started building countermeasures. This brings us to the threat environment.
The defenses exist on a spectrum. Passively, you have architectural shields, deep subterranean construction, heavy water mass barriers to absorb electromagnetic leakage, high-density Faraday cages.
And chaotic entropy generators, right, like plasma globes or electronic noise arrays just scrambling the clean signals so the viewer's cerebellum can't lock on.
Yes, just pure static. But the active countermeasures are a masterclass in physiological warfare. And the most terrifying vulnerability doesn't involve psychic sentries at all. It relies on brutal physics, specifically the 19 hertz frequency.
The ghost frequency.
To understand why 19 hertz is so devastating, you have to look at the physical architecture of the human eyeball. Every object in the universe has a resonant frequency, the rate it naturally oscillates.
Like shattering a wine glass with a specific note?
Exactly. And NASA conducted extensive studies confirming the resonant frequency of the human eyeball is right around 18 to 19 hertz.
Which leads to this incredible real-world story in the sources about an engineer named Vic Tandy.
This story is wild.
It really is. So it's 1998. Tandy is working late in a medical lab that actually has a persistent reputation among the staff for being haunted. He's alone, and suddenly he starts experiencing intense physiological distress. Cold sweats, hyperventilation, just absolute creeping terror.
Classic dread response.
Yeah, and then he sees a gray, shadowy apparition watching him in his peripheral vision. Every time he turns to look at it, it vanishes. He thinks he's losing his mind.
But he's an engineer.
Right, so the next day he brings his fencing foil into the lab to clean it. He clamps the handle into a metal vise on his workbench, and suddenly the blade of the sword starts vibrating wildly, completely silently, just oscillating on its own.
Because of a standing wave.
Exactly. He realizes the room is filled with low-frequency sound infrasound, below human hearing, but carrying massive physical acoustic energy. He tracks it to a newly installed extractor fan at the end of the hall. He measures the acoustic output, and it is humming at exactly 18.98 hertz.
Incredible.
He turns the fan off, the sword stops vibrating, the cold sweats vanish, and the ghosts disappear forever. So a 19 hertz frequency is basically an invisible physiological alarm clock that shakes your eyeballs and tricks your body into thinking it's in a horror movie.
That's entirely accurate. The mechanism is a combination of critical flicker fusion and photic driving. When your environment pulses at 19 hertz, whether it's infrasound or a flickering fluorescent light, your visual cortex attempts to synchronize its neural firing rate to that rhythm.
And because your eyeballs are physically vibrating, the light hitting your retina is distorted.
Yes, that distortion creates phosphenes. Phosphenes are those shimmering, crawling geometric shapes, shadowy blobs, or flashes of light in your peripheral vision.
So while your visual cortex is chasing literal ghosts, the infrasound is also physically vibrating your internal organs.
Your autonomic nervous system interprets that deep internal vibration as an immediate mortal threat. It triggers a massive fight-or-flight dread response. You get flicker vertigo, where the static room feels like it's breathing. You are terrified, and you don't know why.
Now imagine applying that nightmare to a remote viewer doing a CRV session. CRV requires a highly alert beta brainwave state. You need a calm autonomic system for those split-second ideogram reflexes. If your room is contaminated by 19 hertz, you get a massive AOL explosion.
Your analytical mind sees a vibrating shadow and screams, "There's a dark figure in the room." You spend the whole session chasing physical artifacts of your vibrating eye muscles instead of the target signal line. Plus, the physical anxiety ruins the smooth reflex you need for the ideogram. Your pen stroke becomes jagged, completely corrupting the data.
And the disruption is even worse for ERV, or the beacon protocol. ERV needs that delicate theta state. 19 hertz is a fast beta wave frequency. If a viewer in a deep trance gets hit with 19 hertz, their brainwaves violently spike back into beta to deal with the threat.
It shatters the hypnagogic trance instantly.
And the sympathetic resonance trap makes beacons a huge liability here. If your outbounder is standing near an HVAC system putting out 19 hertz, their body feels that primal dread. And because you are telepathically coupled to them, you absorb their panic.
You'll wake up sweating, recording that the target is protected by demons, when your beacon was just standing too close to an air conditioner.
So how did operational viewers overcome this? Because they had to develop protocols.
They treat it as a sensory calibration issue.
Yeah.
The primary defense against 19 hertz photic driving is the hard reset. You simply close your eyes completely for 3 to 5 seconds.
To break the synchronization loop.
Exactly. It terminates the distorted visual input and forces the visual cortex to revert to its internal baseline. They're also trained to shift their focus vector. If your center vision is compromised, you intentionally shift to peripheral vision to blur the signal and stop the brain from analyzing the phosphenes.
Or the jammer strategy, rapidly rubbing your eyes or blinking hard. You create your own chaotic internal phosphenes to override the visual cortex's attempt to sync with the external 19 hertz rhythm. You basically jam the jammer.
But stepping back from all this, it highlights the profound fragility of traditional methods. CRV relies on paper, pens, and analytical quarantines that take hours. ERV requires deep trance, isolation, binaural audio monitors. Dowsing requires physical tools. Beacons are counterintelligence nightmares.
Every single system has a mechanical gap between the signal line and the observer.
And the neocortex constantly wedges itself into that gap.
Which perfectly establishes the necessity for the core focus of today's deep dive. If paper is too slow, tools are too clunky, and 19 hertz ruins your visual cortex, how do you fix it? Enter the squirrel sniper method of etheric pulse and internal dowsing.
This is a brilliant synthesis of autonomic physiology, rhythm, and interoception. The philosophy is simple. If the ideomotor response uses the nervous system to twitch a muscle to swing a pendulum, why not cut the pendulum out entirely?
Why rely on an external tool when you have an internal biological rhythm running flawlessly 24/7? The heartbeat, the vascular system.
Exactly. The method fundamentally relies on transforming your blood flow into a biological polygraph test.
But you can't just listen to your heartbeat when you're stressed. The method starts by physically forcing the body into the correct autonomic state using the vagal brake. It's a very strict 20/12 breathing sequence.
The mechanics of the vagal brake are crucial. It involves 20 cycles of a 12-second breath pattern, featuring breath retention specifically, a 6-second and a 4-second hold.
So you inhale, hold, exhale, hold.
Yes, you're manipulating carbon dioxide levels. But more importantly, this specific rhythmic retention directly stimulates the vagus nerve.
The 10th cranial nerve.
Right, the one that wanders from your brainstem down into your abdomen. When stimulated this way, it forcefully drops your heart rate and stabilizes blood pressure. It acts as a biological brake pedal, ripping you out of the sympathetic fight-or-flight state and anchoring you deeply in the parasympathetic rest and digest state.
Now, in a normal yoga class, getting to that state is the end goal. You feel calm, you go home. But the etheric pulse method uses that state just as the foundation for data retrieval. Because once the vagus nerve calms the physical body, the brain shifts its focus from the outside world entirely to the internal world.
Interoception.
Right. The brain quiets the external noise and listens entirely to its own internal signals. And in this state, the practitioner zeroes in on one highly specific signal. They isolate the physical sound and tactile feeling of the blood flow pulse specifically in their right ear.
That pulse becomes the internal dowsing rod. The nervous system naturally synchronizes to repetitive patterns, so the practitioner trains their focus to sync with a repeating 3-6-9 rhythmic harmonic of their own pulse.
They listen to the blood flow and mentally group the beats, 3 beats, 6 beats, 9 beats. By locking focus onto this rhythm, they establish a baseline carrier wave. It occupies the analytical mind just enough with counting to keep it from guessing, while the subconscious monitors the rhythm.
Think of it as a closed-loop biological filter. In real time, the practitioner establishes the 3-6-9 harmonic. They then mentally hover over a target coordinate or hold a declarative statement.
And if the coordinate is true or the data is uncorrupted, the cerebellum recognizes the resonance.
Yes, there is no biological stress. The vascular system stays deeply relaxed, and the 3-6-9 beat in the ear remains smooth and uninterrupted.
So instead of hooking yourself up to a polygraph machine to see if a suspect is lying, You are literally using your own pulse as a biological polygraph to test if your own data is accurate. So instead of writing AOL on a piece of paper, your literal blood vessels tense up and break the beat. You've essentially swallowed the dowsing rod.
That is the exact mechanism. Now, what happens when a false thought intrudes? What happens if the neocortex tries to assert an AOL or 19 hertz frequency tries to hijack the session?
The moment false data enters, it causes cognitive friction.
The amygdala, the threat detection center, instantly registers that the incoming guess is artificial or forced.
The subconscious knows you're guessing.
Yes, and that cognitive friction causes a microarousal, a tiny instantaneous stress response in the autonomic nervous system. That microstress causes an immediate microscopic constriction in your blood vessels.
Which alters the blood flow in your ear.
And the rhythmic pulse breaks. It stumbles. It skips a beat. It loses the 3-6-9 harmony.
So you don't even have to consciously figure out if you're being tricked. You don't have to write it down. Your body just says, hey, the beat dropped. The vascular tension spiked. This data is garbage. Drop it.
The elegance is that it completely removes the burden of analysis from the neocortex. Traditional dowsers have to interpret a swinging crystal. CRV viewers use laborious paper columns. This custom method bypasses all of that by combining vagal tone with real-time binary cardiovascular feedback. If the pulse drops the beat, the body automatically drops the data.
The source material actually provides a numerical analysis comparing these systems, and the math lays bare exactly why this custom technique was developed. They graded each system out of 300 points, targeting effectiveness, operational security, and signal discrimination.
And the outbounder, or beacon method, scored a dismal 130 out of 300. That's a 43.3% effectiveness rating. It has high targeting effectiveness because human minds easily lock on to other human minds, but its operational security is terrible. You are a brightly lit beacon actively inviting psychic sentries, and your signal discrimination is near zero because you intimately absorb the physical panic of the beacon.
Then we have CRV. It scored 245 out of 300, giving it an 81.7%. High security because it's blind observation of abstract math. Excellent signal discrimination because of the strict AOL paper protocols. But the targeting speed is slow, grinding through stages 1 through 6 just to get actionable intel.
Finally, the custom etheric pulse method. It scores a massive 285 out of 300, an exceptional 95% effectiveness rating. Phenomenal targeting because the internal pulse acts as an instant vector lock. Absolute maximum security because the process is entirely internal resonance, and near-perfect signal discrimination.
Because of that cognitive friction, the autonomic nervous system does the complex math for you. If the vascular rhythm breaks, the vector is rejected instantly.
But hold on, I have to give some pushback here. If this custom internal pulse method is so clean, so perfect, and relies on biology we all possess, why did the U.S. military spend decades and millions of dollars developing the clunky CRV system? Why didn't Ingo Swann and the Stargate team just listen to their ear pulses from day one?
Because you can't build the roof of a house before you pour the foundation. The development of CRV was a mandatory evolutionary step in the science of non-local perception. Before a practitioner can internalize a process and rely on an invisible biological loop, the scientific community had to definitively map the external mechanics.
They had to prove it worked on paper first. They had to physically prove the analytical mind intercepts and corrupts non-local data. They had to invent the concept of analytical overlay. They had to prove the signal line could be parsed into specific components. CRV was the scaffolding. It allowed researchers to understand the architecture of the mind. Once you understand that architecture, an advanced practitioner like Squirrel Sniper can strip away the scaffolding, throw away the paper, and internalize the exact same logic into an autonomic feedback loop.
So the rigid structure of CRV walked so the seamless biology of the etheric pulse could run.
Exactly. CRV proved the signal existed and mapped its interaction with the neocortex. The internal pulse method takes that map and hardwires it into the cerebellum and the vagus nerve.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? We've traveled from the macro to the absolute micro today. We traced the history of intelligence gathering from ancient telluric grids to human beacons on the psychic battlefield, right through the lightning-fast structures of coordinate remote viewing. We explored the massive 69 billion neuron power of your cerebellum and how the ideomotor effect bypasses the sluggish logic of the neocortex.
We also explored the very real physical vulnerabilities, how a 19 hertz fan can literally vibrate your eyeballs, trigger autonomic dread, and shatter cognitive focus through photic driving.
And finally, we arrived at the synthesis, a custom technique that uses interoception, vagal nerve breath work, and the rhythmic pulse of your own blood flow as an infallible, self-correcting non-local compass. A system that rejects false noise automatically based on microscopic vascular tension.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to consider. In our daily lives, we constantly talk about trusting our gut. We have a sudden intuition that a stranger is lying to us or a situation is dangerous. We tend to brush off intuition as something mystical, a vague sixth sense we can't quantify. But based on the rigorous biological mechanics of the etheric pulse method, what if intuition isn't mystical at all?
Oh, wow.
What if countless times a day your conscious mind simply lacks the bandwidth to notice the subtle microrhythmic changes in your own blood flow? Your cerebellum is a supercomputer constantly reading the environment. Your autonomic nervous system is constantly reacting to that data. What if your body is literally screaming the truth at you through the microscopic tension in your veins, and your conscious mind is just too loud, too busy guessing to hear the beat drop?
The compass isn't broken. We just haven't been looking at the needle. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Keep paying attention to your own internal rhythms. Listen for that 369 harmonic in the noise of everyday life, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.